Welcome to the Golden Age of Cinema podcast, a film review show where our panelists share their take on films from the Golden Age of Cinema, the 1990s.
Good evening, listeners, and welcome to episode 6 of the Golden Age of Cinema, the cinema podcast whereby three friends dissect and give their views on entries into the Golden Age of Cinema, which of course is the 1990s. This week we've decided to look at American Pie, which came out in 1999, so right at the end of the GOAC. Kind of an eclectic mix that we've had today, and I think this is the first outright comedy, i.e. a film that was intending to be a comedy that we reviewed. Listeners can make their own decisions as to whether earlier entries, I'm looking at you, Four Rooms, whether was a comedy in and of itself. But can I welcome my panellists as per usual, Seb James and Mike Holmes. Evening, fellas.
Hello, Matty.
Good evening.
This being my pick, I'll give a little bit of context and the reason behind why I picked it. But Seb, over to you. If you could give us a bit of background to the film, please.
Okay, so American Pie is the 1999 critically acclaimed American teen sex film, written by Adam Hertz and directed by brothers Paul and Chris Weitz in what was their directorial debut and was the first film in a long cinematic series, the American Pie series. It stars Jason Briggs, Chris Klein, Alison Hannigan, Natasha Lyonne, Thomas Ian Nicholas, Tara Reid, Maina Suvari, Eddie Kane Thomas, Sean William Scott, and Eugene Levy. This film came out in 1999 to huge box office numbers, which instantly spawned its three sequels, which were American Pie 2, American Wedding, and American Reunion. This film concentrates on the attempted sexual exploits of the five best friends, Jim, Kevin, Oz, Finch, and Stifler.
That's great. Yeah, as I said earlier, I'll just give a bit of context as to why I chose this. Given it came out in 1999, I wasn't particularly old myself. I was about 12, and it was the first real time that it was the same summer that I also remember watching Kevin and Perry Go Large. I don't know if either of you remember that film.
I do.
I do not.
Oh, wow. That how have we never mentioned that? But just, kind of a bit risque, young adolescent comedy, and the 90s version of, say, Porky's or some other equivalent where, it's not particularly original or very witty, but just a really easy-to-watch film with gags that you could laugh with your friends about and just really embryonic of good times I had with my friends when I was a kid. Probably didn't understand half the jokes, but just really, really enjoyed it at the time, and I thought really good film to revisit. So with that, I'd just be interested to know when each of you saw it. So I'll hand it over to you first, Seb, as the youngest member of our trio. You probably would have been not very old at all when this came out. Maybe six, maybe didn't get it in the original run. Talk me through when you saw it for the first time.
No, funnily enough, when I was 6 years old, I wasn't taken to see this film by my parents. We were more sort of going for a Phantom Menace kind of vibe. That was the most risque film that I saw at that age in the cinema. But no, I came to this, I can't even remember when. But it must have been when I was maybe about 14 or 15 or something. And it was one of those seminal films that you kind of, like the classic film that you'd watch at a sleepover or that kind of thing, because it was a bit naughty, it was a bit rude. It was about high school, it was about sex. And yeah, I think I just remember kind of watching this in my pretty early adolescence, just kind of thinking, okay, cool, so that's what sex is like. And Yeah, which is kind of, I think, how a lot of people from my age kind of, when they first saw this film, how they kind of related to it, which is very, very different from how I feel about it, having watched it back the other day.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I don't remember the first time I saw this. It wasn't at the cinema. It was similar to yourself. It was actually at a friend's house on a sleepover where we'd got a load of Asda pizzas, some beers, thinking we were really badass. When actually, if you look back at it now, it's
pretty tragic.
It's pretty tragic. I mean, if this was sex ed in the 90s, I mean, I'm quite surprised I've got a missus right now. But I won't be too hard on myself. But yeah, so I saw it sleepover for a friend's 13th birthday, actually. And, we're still thinking we're really lucky to have kissed a girl at that stage. But just a really fun intro into, well, they're not really romantic comedies, are they? It's like teen comedies, what I talked about earlier. And yeah, I've watched all of the subsequent films. Probably actually only watched the American Reunion film a couple of years ago. They got progressively worse. In fact, I think American Pie 2 was pretty good, but some of the others were. The dad, and I can't remember the name of the actor now. He's
Eugene Levy.
That's the one. So he's the one that's always ever present. But going back to revisit this film for the podcast, I mean, there were a couple of laugh out loud moments for me, I thought, today, and I did just think about how bad it was, but I think it embraced that very well. And yeah, I just thought it was a great film to revisit. Some really good memories from being a kid, and as someone of his age at the time, where he probably did understand some of the humour. Mikey, when did you see it?
Indeed, that is true, Matty. So I first saw this movie in the back end of 1999, George Street Cinemas in Sydney, which were the main cinema complex in Sydney at the time. I saw it with a girlfriend. A packed cinema. From memory, we had to queue outside to get in. I went in not really knowing very much about it. I think she had heard good things. So off we went. Very, very much, very much a packed cinema from memory. Basically, it was, everyone was in a good mood. It was the back end of 1999. Moving towards the end of the millennium. Bit of a party sort of atmosphere.
Everybody was ready for the end of the world and Y2K.
Y2K and all that sort of stuff, all that good gear. And basically it was very funny, for everyone at the time. So it was, it was constant laughter in the cinema. And then for particular scenes, which I'm sure we'll get into, there was, it was quite raucous. A couple of moments where I think people were massively grossed out. And then I think a couple of other moments where, people were shocked, but, in a sort of funny, I hesitate to say good way, but shocked humorously, put it that way.
Great. So we've all come at this from different angles, but all seem to have shared an initial embrace in how ridiculous and funny it was. So given that, as we've said, it came at the end of the decade, end of the 1990s, the GOAC, and transitioned into the noughties, and I think very heavily influenced that teen comedy genre.
For sure.
I'd be interested to know what you each thought of some of the dominant themes, if you can say as such, of a teen comedy. But Mikey, I'll go with you first. You had some thoughts that you said as to what you saw as some of the dominant and emerging themes within the movie, and equally I'd like to hear a bit of what you both thought, how it transitioned more widely into the genre.
Yeah, sure. I think as you rightly pointed out, Matty, this film was very much inspired by Porky's, which came out in 1981. That in itself, I mean, this movie, generated some very good numbers off a very modest budget. But so did Porky's back in the day. Porky's and several others. I think Animal House and a couple of other the more successful ones. They spawned, if you like, this subgenre. So in the early 80s, there were a lot of copycats, all the sequels, etc., etc. And so when the script for this was being written, it was written very much with Porky's in mind. In terms of the themes for this movie, I think the two things that stand out for me are firstly the desperation and drive of teenage male lust, along with the ineptitude that characterizes it. If you think to the scene where Nadia is getting changed in Jim's bedroom, and
I think we all spent a lot of time with that scene, Mike.
Yes, indeed. And Jim's running to the other house to watch it. I think if he was being chased by a Bengal tiger, he couldn't have actually run any faster. Just the desperation that's written all over his face. As he drives to get a sneak peek. So I think the sort of the first theme that stands out for me, I think it's in some ways sort of not complimentary, but I think the female exasperation, that sort of goes with that sort of male drive and that ineptitude, certainly at that age. I think the jokes are continually on the guys. I think a few of them in ways that would perhaps please certain female audience members. So I think the beer cup scene, perhaps.
Oh God.
The premature ejaculation scene, not once, twice, and the fact that towards the end, Jim is so utterly used and dominated by Michelle. The jokes really are on them at the end of the day.
Could this have inspired the social justice warrior movement? Who knows?
Well, actually, I think on that, I was watching specifically the webcam scene that you're referring to there, Mikey. I was watching that and just thinking, there is not a snowball's chance in the fiery depths of hell that this gets made in the 2010s. Not a chance. As you say, Matt, Mikey, it shows kind of like the outrageous lust, but also the ineptitude of the adolescent man, but also it's just so kind of creepily predatorial that it's just like there's no way it would be made today. No way.
I think the thing you have to remember with this is when it at the time, so this was made in 1998, came out in 1999. A webcam was a very new concept, really, for the suburban middle class sort of teenager. I mean, when I watched the movie, I was sort of like, oh wow, he has a webcam in his room. I didn't know anyone that had a webcam in their room. Remember, this is the days of dial-up internet. I think if you look at some of the websites that they're looking at, very old school. I think the video, the software they're playing, QuickTime, I think, so some old school movie software that we had in the late 90s. So I don't necessarily think that when it was made then that it had the same perhaps connotations that it would now, but because those things have moved so far between now and then, with technology, fundamentally, Seb, I agree with you. I don't think it would get made today. in the way that was made then.
And cinema is all the poorer for it. Seb, what do you see as some of the dominant themes?
As you say, Matty, to kind of pick out the thematic subtext of what is a hilarious teen comedy is a little bit of a challenge. But firstly, I think kind of like to touch on Mikey's point and yours as well about how this did like spawn a genre. Like it did. It was the basis of the teen sex genre, which ran pretty much, I would say, throughout the early 21st century, all the way up until about Superbad, which was 2007, I think, that came out. And
yeah,
pretty much it went from here to Superbad, and then after they did Superbad, they were like, okay, cool, we can't do any more of these.
Can I just say, Sebi, I think it revitalized that sort of genre, because if you go back to Porky's 1981, which is pretty much the first one of these, I think that spawned all these sequels and rip-offs and really bad versions, and I mean they really did milk that cow till it was dead. So by the mid 80s, that sort of thing had pretty much finished up. So I think if you go from sort of late 80s to this, there really isn't very much in this sort of category, and so I think when American Pie came out, it really did revitalize it. It was done much more cleverly than most of those ones in the 80s. And as you rightly point out, it in turn spawned a whole number of sequels, rip-offs, knockoffs, the quality of which generally poor, with the odd exception.
I think the high school, the high school setting is, arguably it doesn't start even with Porky's. You can even go as far as back as something like Grease, albeit I know that isn't a romantic comedy, but it's continually reinvented and reinterpreted into different mediums or different genres, sorry, not mediums, just because it works, because we've all gone through it. And I think, a point that you made there, Mikey, this had probably been the 80s way of doing it. And it needed a pause, as everything does in cinema, really, and it needed something to be revitalized. And then this was the time that it got encapsulated and redone really well. And it became very tired and overdone to an extent. And I like the pickup on Superbad as an example, which I think was a really good film and done really well as well. But I'll round off my thoughts in a second on just what I thought it did really well. But Seb, I appreciate we butted in there. What was? Did you have any of the final thoughts?
Well, I was just thinking. So that pretty much post Superbad, the sort of coming of age high school story very much shifted away from the male perspective and went more towards women. I think you get a lot of very much with kind of gross out humor. There was infamously Bridesmaids, which kind of which came out in 2011, which kind of was taking this
Rubbish.
whole gross out genre. I have to say, to be honest, like I've actually not seen it, but it's famous for taking the genre and turning it into like the girls can do this just as well as the guys kind of thing, which then in turn kind of led to the shift being, for studios and for cinema in general to basically say like, look, we've been there, we've done that, we've shown the male sex coming of age story. It's time for us to show the female coming of age stories in high schools, etc., and things like that, and show that we can do gross out, show that we can just be as raunchy, just as risque, and stuff like that. And I think there is a time now for us to go back to kind of reboot it again. I mean, you're right, because since Superbad, we haven't actually had anything which kind of focuses in on. I mean, unless there is, and I just haven't seen it, or it's not. I'm not the target audience for it anymore. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think now you're seeing, well, post Superbad, you had like High School Musical, so maybe switching up genres, things like that. Don't want to dwell on this too much because we are here for the tits and arse jokes. But I mean, even Mikey probably remembers this. Saved by the Bells making a comeback. So yeah, I think everything's cyclical. Everything will come around again. But just to move on to my view on this, I think it really, really perfectly encapsulated the time in which it was made, and something which, Seb, you definitely might have picked up on just because of how old you were then, and I was right at the start of my, I don't want to say appreciation because my taste in music at 12 was crap, but when you look back at it now, Mikey, you were probably, 24, 25, but it really, the soundtrack perfectly encapsulated the music of the era. You know, pop punk was
very punky.
Yeah, pop punk was massive at the time. So I'm looking at the soundtrack. You obviously had Blink-182 who made the cameos in the film. We had the Loose Nuts, Goldfinger, who I used to love, Third Eye Blind. You know, these are all the times when I was going down to a record shop as a kid, picking up a CD and just thinking, oh, I'm really cool, and buying oversized shirts, which was quite a good effort for me because I was a fat kid. But I really enjoyed it. One of the big highlights, actually, of how it was interwoven into the film. I just thought, and it never really bettered itself. As I said earlier, I thought American Pie 2, decent film. They got progressively worse. But I thought this did really well. You know, the setting, the music, the actors. We haven't really touched upon it then. At the time, the only person that I knew was the chick out of Buffy, who's got quite an integral role. She's the girl who
Hannigan.
Yeah, who's Michelle in the film. But yeah, really, really good. And I think at that point, it's a really good transition into what do we think was the best scene in the film, because rewatching it again today, and as I've said earlier, I haven't watched this in years. There were some hidden gems in there which I'd completely forgot about. I'm sure all of you, when we picked this film, thought there'll have been some standout scenes, and I won't prejudge what you're about to say, but for me, there were some beauties there which I'd forgot about. So, Mikey, should we go with you first? What was your favourite scene?
I think when I watched it, my favourite scene was really. I mean, there were quite a few. I did laugh pretty hard in it from memory, but I think the scene where Jim and Michelle, they're seated on the couch at the dance floor, and he's utterly fed up with all the, at band camp, all the stories, blah blah blah, and he's just accepted his fate, kind of thing. And then, she just she tells some sort of boring story, and just as he's sort of switching off, she says something like, and then I stuck a flute in my pussy, and like it was just like I remember the audience was just like, what? And then like everyone just sort of cracks up, and then she says something. Are we going to go? We're going to go do it now because I'm getting kind of antsy. It just goes 180 degrees, and then she turns out to be really aggressive and dominating.
Social Justice Warrior shout out. Again, that's where it came from.
The audience was in stitches. I laughed really hard. At the time, I think it was very cleverly done. As I watched it watched it a couple of days ago, like you, Maddie, for the first time in I think quite a few years. I'd say 15 years at least. I did sort of pick up more on the subtle humour and the jokes that are just sort of dotted along the way. But I think watching it the other day, I think Eugene Levy is great in this. I think the scene where he's caught Jim with the apple pie, and then they're both at the kitchen table with the remains of the pie, middle of the table, and we'll just tell your mother we ate it. total deadpan. Jim couldn't be more humiliated. Really brilliantly done. Eugene Levy, I think he steals it just to some extent, steals the show. But those are my scenes now and then.
Yeah, I think with Eugene Levy, like you say, we haven't really touched on the actors, but you're right. Eugene Levy is by far the best actor in this because he is pretty much the only adult actor, and apart from that, amongst the kids, pretty much the only guy who puts in a pretty good performance is probably Sean William Scott, who obviously was was out of that bunch. He had the best career out of the lot of them. So you can kind of see.
Where's my car, dude?
Where's my car? Yeah, dude, where's my car? Like a bunch of other kind of teeny stuff, but also he had probably the most successful and commercial career out of the lot of that ensemble, pretty much. Except maybe Alison Hannigan, who did the TV show
How I Met Your Mother.
So, oh yeah. So, what about your favourite scenes, Seb?
It is difficult. Okay, I think for I'm going to pick my favorite scene, but then I'm also going to pick my favorite tactic from the boys to try and get laid, essentially. So the favorite scene is when Eugene Levy comes into Jim's room with the pile of nudie bags and comes in and tries to kind of give him the father-son chat, and it just goes. It's just incredibly awkward. And I was watching it and I was thinking, like, this is I couldn't. I wanted to turn my eyes away because I was so like embarrassed and so cringed at the entire situation. I think it was just a really, really like stomach churning scene because it's just so embarrassing.
Yeah, and that's why it works.
So good in it, though.
Exactly.
Yeah. Whilst not the exact situation, I'm sure we can all recall, and people out there listening,
exactly
something similar will have happened. So that's why it resonates so well.
For sure. And my favourite tactic is Finch spreading rumours amongst the girls about how he's done X, Y, Z, ABC, about how he's got he's very well endowed, about how he's amazing in bed, about how he punched Stifler and stuff like that. I thought that was just so funny. And then him sort of rolling out like his golf putting green and just putting in the middle of the campus courtyard and just saying, "Don't worry, fellas, they'll come to me," or whatever it is. It's just hilarious.
Very good. For me, this is no doubt I laughed at the time, but rewatching it now, this is probably my favourite scene, having just rewatched it again this evening, when they're in it's the end part of the film. They've gone back to the lake house for post prom and the party that Stifler's hosting, and Finch, he's on a real low ebb. He's moping around. He lets himself into the room where it says "Do not enter," and he finds Stifler's mom. And well, earlier on in the film, you'd had the two guys chanting "MILF, MILF," and at the time when I remember watching this, MILF, they were like all the kids at school. We were just picking out the hot moms. Oh, moms! I went American there for a minute. The whole of hot mums, but that particular bit where they get it, where Finch goes into the room, and then there's that back and forth, and I don't know if you picked up on it, between Finch and Stifler's mom, but there's that music at the back which just makes it like really cheesy, and they're really overloading the sexual overtones of it. And then,
well, yeah, they were just ripping off The Graduate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was just about to come on to that. So it's perfectly done. And then he asked for a drink, something a bit stronger. And then this is why it made it my favourite scene, having rewatched it. And she says, "This is another way it couldn't be redone now." I mean, think about Me Too, and when Stifler's mom says, "Aged 18 years, just the way I like it." Oh, that's just. I totally forgot about that, and I know that you two gentlemen are are aficionados of fine whiskies, as we've had an enjoyable evening with whiskey and cigars, but that just really got me. I just thought that is brilliant. And I know at 12 or 13 years old that'd have been completely lost on me. But I just thought, really nice bit of writing, good bit of comedic timing, and just compared to all the other jokes in the film, which are, quite crass, I just thought that was quite subtle. And or maybe I'm being a bit too much into it.
I don't know if it's that subtle. She
No, it's
not. Raise her eyebrows and kind of gives him a sexy smolder as she says it.
But it's more subtle than shagging a pie, isn't it?
It is also slightly more subtle than shagging a pie, yes.
But just really, really enjoyed it. Several standout moments.
For sure. Can I ask everyone who their favorite character in this is, or like the one that they maybe not relate to the most, but the one that they kind of their favorite character and out of the five boys, because I think they kind of all represent a generic kind of male form at that time.
It's an interesting that you asked that, because I did actually give this some thought, and as I was watching it, I thought, who would I most be like, kind of thing, and basically the answer I came up with was excluding Stifler. Bear in mind that I've had a couple of mates over the years, a lot like Stifler, but excluding Stifler, I would actually say parts of all four. So I think I sort of related to each of the other four, in sort of various ways. I'm kind of sorry to say that I've had a few Jimbo moments over the years, as we all have, I suspect. And that ineptitude that I talked about. When I think back, just that girl really didn't need me to point out the directions to the library. She just wanted my phone number, kind of, after I'd sent her on her way.
I thought you were talking about some other moments, but okay, yeah, fair enough.
So it probably a cross between Jimbo and Ostriker, actually, because at the time I looked like Ostriker, or something like that. But I think
you have some curtains, Mikey.
Yeah.
Oh no, there's a great scene where they're getting ready for one of the early Stifler's parties, and Jim says, "What do you reckon? Will she like this?" And does something with her hair, or this, and the hairstyles are just exactly the same.
Yes,
that was quite funny. I quite enjoyed that.
What about you, Matty?
I would probably agree that you see elements of of myself in all of them. I'd probably say just about how cataclysmically awful I was with girls, arguably until I was about 29, actually. Paul Finch, I think there's a bit of Finch in me there, I think. Spreading rumours about myself. No, I didn't quite go that far, but yeah, I think that's why it works well. You see a bit of yourself in all of them, but I kind of resonated with him at the end, because he ends up triumphing over the rest of his schoolmates or classmates who ended up making fun of him, and ultimately wins his war with Stifler. So yeah, I think that's it for me.
Yeah, I think you are right. There's something in there for everyone to relate to, and everyone can relate to all of them, if that makes sense. Which is kind of a credit to the writing and how and kind of how it's done. I just really like Oz's arc. I think it's actually a really well constructed character arc. Actually, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it is, and then he ends up. It counts for nothing in the sequels, doesn't it? Which is ironic, but yeah.
Yeah, but because the thing is that he kind of has to go back to somewhere in order to then, because he has a very, very complete arc. So you kind of have to. You can't really do anything more with that character, because he's completed his arc. But yeah, I think it's a really nice arc. The guy going from kind of jock to finding a sensitive side, doing it initially as a pretend, and then kind of actually, enjoying it. And he has this big moment where he leaves the game, stuff like that. I think it's a really, really uplifting arc. I think Kevin's arc is really interesting because I think the relationship between Kevin and his girlfriend, who I forgot the Vicky, thank you. I think their arc is quite interesting because it shows the dichotomy between men being very emotionally guarded but physically open, and women being very emotionally open but physically guarded. With regards to Kevin wants to have sex with Vicky but won't say I love you, and Vicky wants to say I love you to Kevin and wants him to say it back but won't have sex with him.
Yeah, you've left us both a bit spellbound there, I reckon, Seb. Great. Okay. Well, yeah, I remember when I suggested this film, you two, there were contrasting opinions as to whether it was going to be worth our time. And believe you me, compared to some of the other entries that we've watched, I certainly believe that it's been well received. So I've really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed the discussion tonight, guys. And I think safe to say we've all took a little bit from rewatching the film, which leads me on to what we do every week. Liars out of 10 for the uninitiated, and we are in episode 6. There shouldn't be many of you. We judge every film up for discussion based against the greatest entry in the filmography of the golden age of cinema, the GOAC, being 1997's Liar Liar, whereby Hollywood executives reflected on the fact they could do no better after Jim Carrey's pitch-perfect performance as a lying liar. So, Seb, as the youngest of this trio, and somebody who I know wasn't initially that impressed with the choice, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, you're right, Matthew. I wasn't overwhelmingly pleased with this choice when you first floated the idea. But having and kind of after I watched it, and whilst I was watching it, I was really thinking, Jesus Christ, this is not terrible, but this is just such a generic 90s film. But kind of, thinking back on it and considering it and going through this discussion with you guys, I think it's a lot better. Certainly it's the best of its class.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And I think that is very, very credible. And sort of its class is what it is. And I think that class can only really ever be rated so highly. So I'm going to give it a very solid 7 liars out of 10.
Good. Mikey, what about you?
Fundamentally, I think this is it's a very entertaining film. It's clever. It was fun at the time. I very much enjoyed watching it at the cinema, as did the rest of the audience. I agree with Seb. I think it's the best in its class. I think the writing is quite good. The cast, the with some exceptions, some good cast members in there, but fundamentally they're fairly generic. So really, I think it's the writing that carries this film. But I think fundamentally it's cinema junk food. So a bucket of the Colonel's filth, which I'm craving incidentally, but I agree with Sebi that it can only be rated so highly. And so consequently, like Sebi, I'm giving this a solid 7 liars out of 10.
I really do like the point that you've made there about the actors, because other than the woman out of Buffy and the old guy, and they've purposely not named the actors to reaffirm the point, we've not really talked about anybody, have we? It's all just, the ensemble cast works so well.
They're just not very good.
Yeah, because they're not very good.
I mean, fundamentally, it's Alison Hannigan, Eugene Levy, Sean William Scott, and the rest just never really did very much. Really,
They did what they were told. They did what they were told.
And with that, and this is probably some level of bias, given it was my choice. I think this is the first time that I'm going to come anywhere close to the scores of you two, but I'm going to give it the same. I'm going to give it 7 out of 10. I'm usually the harshest critic, it's fair to say, on this podcast, but really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed revisiting it. Best in class, unlike some of the acting. But that was the whole point of it, and that's why I think it worked really well. I've really, really enjoyed it.
it's a lot of fun. It really is a lot of fun.
Yeah, interesting to revisit in this day and age.
Oh, yeah. And also to reflect on how, through the ages, we're all crap at engaging with women, lads.
Universal truth has been spoken.
Which is why we're doing a movie review podcast.
Speak for yourself.
Okay, so over to you, Seb. As we do every week, we'll hand it over for the preview of next week and what the randomizer has brought us for our next film.
So, gentlemen, as you know, there's an eclectic mix of cinema in the randomizer, and today it has served up a real treat for us. Next week, please join us to review 1992's American Gothic horror film Bram Stoker's Dracula, featuring Gary Oldman, Winona Ryder, Anthony Hopkins, and Gorak favourite Keanu Reeves, directed and produced by Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah,
good, very good.
This is Mikey's pick. I think I'm correct in saying.
You're correct, yes.
I think you've already done Keanu a disservice by putting him fourth on that list, because my God, can that guy chew some scenery? And if you want to chew some scenery, what a better place to go than Whitby? So yeah, thank you very much, Jeds. I really look forward to next week. It was on our list of 10. It was one of the ones that I was really looking forward to. As a complete bastardization of the material, but also at the same time, very good fun. Great. Well, thank you both for this week, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Matty. Cheers, mate.